All right, so today we're going to really dive deep into something that I think a lot of our listeners are going to find fascinating.
Yeah.
And it has to do with like cars,
Yeah.
specifically European premium car brands in the U.S. market.
Absolutely.
So, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, even Volvo, stuff like that.
Yeah, some of those big names that we see on the road all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And, we've got a bunch of research here that kind of goes into, a specific period of time, really leading up to early 2025.
Okay.
And that had to do with tariffs,
Oh, yeah.
like how tariffs really shook up this whole market.
Yeah, tariffs can definitely be a game changer.
Totally. And that's really what we're going to be exploring here. Like, what were the main effects of these tariffs, both, the ones the U.S. imposed and then how other countries responded.
Like a retaliation.
Exactly. Yeah. And how that all impacted, the profitability and even the strategies of these car companies.
Yep. Their whole way of doing business, really.
Yeah. And we're going to see how, this idea of like building cars closer to where you're selling them really started to become even more important.
Yeah, localization of production becoming huge.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess to kick things off, like, can you help break down exactly what happened with these tariffs?
Sure. So basically, you can think of a tariff like a tax on imported goods. So in this case, it was the U.S. putting a 10% tax on cars coming in from Europe, and that hit those premium brands like Mercedes, BMW, and Audi pretty hard.
So like if a car costs, $50,000, suddenly it's $55,000.
Right, exactly. So that immediately increased costs for these manufacturers.
Yeah.
And they had to make some tough choices about,
absorbing it or passing it on?
Exactly, whether to absorb it or pass it on to consumers in the form of higher prices.
Right.
And then it gets even more interesting because other countries weren't just going to sit back and watch.
No way.
So China, for example, retaliated with its own tariffs on U.S.-made vehicles. And that ended up affecting some European brands, too.
Really?
Yeah, the ones that had production facilities in the U.S.
So it's like this whole tangled web.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another.
Totally. And it's fascinating to see how, like you said, some of these companies were already kind of ahead of the curve.
Right.
Like we know BMW had that plant in South Carolina.
Absolutely. And that gave them a bit of an advantage.
Totally.
Because they were already producing some cars in the U.S.
Yeah.
And avoiding those import duties. But then these tariffs kind of forced everyone's hands.
Yeah.
And we saw companies like Mercedes-Benz really ramp up their production in Alabama as a way to get around those tariffs.
Looks like they had to adapt.
Yeah, it was a necessity,
Totally. And I mean, that must have had a huge impact on the local economy in Alabama.
Oh, absolutely. Creating tons of jobs.
Yeah.
Boosting the local economy. It's kind of a silver lining to the whole situation.
Yeah, so it's like this, economic ripple effect that goes way beyond just, the car companies themselves.
For sure.
And speaking of which, we had this visual aid, a bar chart, showing U.S. sales of these premium brands going back several decades, like all the way back to like the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
And it showed, Volvo, Audi, Mercedes, BMW.
Okay.
What stood out to you when you look at that chart?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is that the demand for these brands has been strong and growing, over this long period.
Yeah.
Americans love their European cars.
They do.
And while the chart doesn't give us like a crystal clear picture of what happened right after the tariffs were implemented, the general trend suggests that even with the added costs, their appeal didn't really fade.
Yeah.
Now there might be, a little bit of a flattening or a slight dip in the growth curve around that time.
Interesting.
Maybe hinting that some consumers were a little price sensitive.
Yeah.
But we'd need more data to really confirm that. But overall, it seems like those brands held their own.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize just how much all of this fits into this bigger picture of global trade.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about, one country putting a tax on another country's cars.
Right. It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's about these intricate supply chains and how companies have to navigate this complex web of, rules and regulations.
It's like a chess game.
It really is.
And it's constantly changing.
Yeah. And it wasn't like every car company responded to these tariffs in the same way.
Right.
Some of them might have just decided to eat some of those costs, to maintain their market share, even if it meant lower profits.
Right.
While others might have said, hey, our brand is strong enough.
Yeah.
we can raise prices and people will still buy our cars.
Right.
And what's interesting is that some analysts were already predicting that car companies were going to move towards more regional production hubs anyway, even without tariffs, just for efficiency reasons.
Makes sense.
You know, it makes sense to build cars closer to where you're selling them.
Totally.
And these tariffs just kind of accelerated that trend.
So it's like they sped up something that was already happening.
Exactly. They were a catalyst for change.
Yeah, so to kind of sum all of this up,
yeah,
it sounds like these tariffs were a major curveball for these European car brands.
They were.
They immediately increased costs and likely had an impact on how much consumers paid.
For sure.
But they also pushed these companies to adapt even faster and move towards more localized production, which added like a whole other layer of complexity to their global operations.
Exactly. And, you know, it really makes you think about what the future holds.
Yeah.
You know, how might future trade agreements or disagreements, for that matter, further change the cars that are available to us and the strategies of these big manufacturers.
Absolutely.
It's a fascinating and constantly evolving landscape.
It really is. Well, this has been super insightful. Thanks for breaking all of this down.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Anytime.
All right.
And for all of you listening out there, you know, keep an eye on this stuff because it's only going to get more interesting from here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.